Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip Hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas. This is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast specifically designed to keep you caught up on all things hip hop music and culture that happened throughout the week. 50 years of hip hop. 50 years of hip hop officially today, August 11, 1973, is universally recognized as the day that hip hop was born. Now, was it? Yeah, I guess so. In a lot of ways, was hip hop really kind of in existence before then? Probably so, but not recognized as hip hop. One of the things that happened on that date that kind of makes it a day to commemorate is the birth of a technique, which is the break, the get down, a DJ technique, which not only fostered a DJ technique, but the MC they had at the party with them. The people who would hit the floor and break and pop lock. So what occurred in that party at that time in particular felt like the beginnings of something new, which is hip hop. And today, some of y'all don't know, we call rap hip hop exclusively. You forget about the DJs, you forget about the breakers, you forget about the fashion. It's all about, you forget about the graffiti artists, which still exists, to be honest. All of it is a part of hip hop culture. Rap music in particular is just one element of what is the culture. So there's your brief lesson on what hip hop is and always will be. 50 years of hip hop. Now, I'm not gonna hold y'all. This list that we're doing today, top 10 impact artists in hip hop history. Now, not top 10, right? Not top 10. And not the reason behind me doing this kind of a list to commemorate 50 years of hip hop has more to do with just acknowledging the impact of some hip hop artists. So what does that mean? That means there are people and artists who won't appear on this specific list that have had an impact on hip hop. I'm just choosing to point out these 10. So what I need you to do to keep the conversation going is to point out another 10 in the comment section that's different from this 10. There are plenty of artists that we could think of that you won't hear, that you could say, well, can't forget the impact of this group or this artist. It's an exercise in conversation. That's all it is. Let's get right into the business, though. So let me start by just going through the top 10 one by one, and I'm going to tell you why, and not only why I chose them, but what impact specifically they had on the game. No order. LL Cool J. Now, some of y'all know I consider LL Cool J to be the GOAT. I think he is what Sugar Ray Robinson was to boxing, or is to boxing. The total package. Hip hop is not only underground bar kings. Hip hop is not only radio play. It's not only for the guys. It's not only for the ladies. It's not only for a certain coast. It's about all of it. It's about your impact on everyone and everything. And unlike Too Short or E40, who had long careers just like LL Cool J as far as releasing music, LL Cool J was the blueprint for longevity combined with high-profile success. Let's not forget, LL Cool J was introduced to the hip-hop world in the mid-'80s. From that point on, he had platinum hits through several decades of hip-hop, as well as several eras of hip-hop, right? From the mid-'80s to the late '80s, '90s, the 2000s, right? And then he eventually kind of fell off closer to the 2010s. You know, his impact wasn't the same, but by then, what he had done, especially when it comes to accolades and hits, had not been seen before in hip-hop. He literally had hits in eras he shouldn't have been as popular, right? You hear people talk about, you know, the golden era, the death row era, the aftermath era, the bad boy era, the Rockefeller, Rough Rider. LL had hits next to all of those new artists where his peers had already faded away. Now, it's not only longevity. LL Cool J, as we all know, very successful on the radio, without a doubt. But also, LL Cool J has a long history of battle rap. LL Cool J has a long history of just making hardcore hip hop, right? Boom bap. Getting some of the best guys of today on one posse cut and rhyming next to them. He has a history of that. So, in a lot of ways, when you look at somebody like him, there wasn't anything like him in hip hop. Ever. There wasn't. You can even go to things like, for example, I Need Love. Like, you know, a lot of times they like to say, yo, that was the point where rappers knew that they could make rap love songs and be successful. True that. Houdini also kind of did it also, but LL took it to a different level. LL was kind of like, if he was a singer, he'd be like a pop sensation, right? Heartthrob kind of thing. But he was that for hip hop. But again, that wasn't the sum of his parts. Anybody who calls himself a hip hop head and does not acknowledge LL's hardcore hip hop legacy is irresponsible. I'm just saying. Next, Rakim, the God. How could you not start with somebody like a Rakim also? His impact on the game is different from LL's, right? He doesn't have the longevity that LL had. But what Rakim has is he fathered a style of rhyming that is here till this day. You like Griselda? You like The Lox? You like Nas? You like Jay-Z? Right? Pun 50. You could just keep going as it relates to East Coast hip hop. Really. You could just keep going. And Rakim is the blueprint for that. And why? Because in a lot of ways, I mean, you know the history. If you read his autobiography, which is great for any hip hop head, he paid attention to his craft in a way that I felt like was kind of ahead of its time. If you look at his writing style, it's like musical notes. And it's because he patterned his style in the same way that John Coltrane of jazz played his horn. And it worked. Right? It felt like a slow flow back then. It felt like a lazy flow, but it was perfect for where hip hop needed to go because he also raised the bar of lyricism, right? At a time where, don't get me wrong, lyrics mattered, technique mattered, but there were few that could do it, right? There was Cool G Rap, there was Big Daddy Kane, there was KRS-One, who were kind of known for that. Grandmaster Cass is probably also looked at as like an early influence for a lot of those guys too. But at the end of the day, Rakim was... Without Rakim, I don't think you have the Nas that you would get, or that you would eventually get. I don't think you do. Without the influence of Rakim, even on West Coast cats, I just don't think you have that attention to lyricism on another level. it is what it is. When you fathered a style of rhyming that still exists to this day, you've made a major impact on hip hop music and culture. So, Nas, let's get to it, man. Also elevated the skill level in a way that hadn't been seen at the time, because sure, you had Kool G Rap who would tell crime tales and stuff like that, right? But Kool G Rap came more across like Mario Puzo, right? Like a lot of Godfather style, a lot of, some hood references, but not as deep. Nas took street tales and combined them with poetry. See, his verses were more poetic than Kool G Rap's. Kool G Rap's was like a lot of wordplay and a lot of, just straight up storytelling. But Nas's depiction of street life was so real and so vivid, and the way he laced his words, right? It was poetic. And Illmatic is a testament to that. Illmatic is considered arguably the best hip hop album of all time. Now, I could think of plenty of albums that are just overall better produced. At the time, I felt like Illmatic was too short, right? There was a couple of songs there, that were cool, but in general, there are other albums that are just built from top to bottom better, right? Not just better beats, but just better albums. But what made Illmatic special was Nas, right? Regardless of the beats, regardless of how many songs, Nas had a flow that it made you want to rewind. He never sat on his punchlines. He just kept going. So sometimes you're like, damn, what'd he say? What'd he say? And then you would have to go back. You know what I'm saying? So Nas lyrically helped to elevate the game and influence his peers around him to be better, because the admiration that Nas received at that time, especially to have some of the top producers producing all on his album, and he's new to the game, there was no pattern of success that told them that their time and their beats were worth it for a rookie. But it was his skill, his voice, all of those elements combined, and also coming from the legendary Queensbridge, that created a mystique about Nas and Illmatic that hasn't been seen to this day. Another thing I want to mention about Nas is, more importantly, he's had that same longevity as LL, right? Maybe surpassed him in a lot of ways when it comes to longevity, because now he's on an unprecedented run working with Hit Boy. King's Disease trilogy, Magic, two albums, even though I didn't really like the last one, but it wasn't whack. Wasn't whack. Nas had never released dope albums that consistently. He might do 2 albums in a row and then have one that most people don't like, but 5 this late into his career, knocking on the door of 50, if he isn't 50 already, unprecedented. His impact on the game cannot be questioned. Next up, Snoop Doggy Dogg. Now, before you get started, remember, it's my list. Doesn't mean that other people weren't impactful. These are the people I'm choosing to highlight. Please leave your comments in the comment section below for others who you feel like belong on an impact list for hip hop history. Snoop Doggy Dogg. Now, what made Snoop different from the rest of the West Coast rappers, right? Obviously, coming out of the Death Row camp, kind of somewhat coming out of the ruthless tree of gangster rap, Snoop was different than everybody else. He was different from Ice Cube and MC Ren and Eazy and Dr. Dre, right? Because Snoop was a gangster rapper who was also smooth. Snoop's music made gangster rap radio friendly, right? because it was a groove, but the lyrics were like typical for gangster rap, right? And it was that part about him, his appeal, to not really compromise his integrity, his lyrical integrity as a quote unquote gangster rapper, but still have commercial success, was somewhat unheard of, right? Like, people liked NWA because they were rebellious, but NWA wasn't for everybody because everything was hard edged, like hardcore hip hop in your face. Some people were offended by that, some people were afraid, right? So people like Ice Cube scared them, but Snoop was smooth. He made you like him. I kind of like that joke. But they just miss all the gang signs and the crip walks and in the set. They miss all of that because it sounds good. And I think Snoop was unique in that way. I think he was kind of a blueprint for you to do both. Hey, I'm a gangster rapper that you like. Whereas back then, most older folks, for the most part, did not like gangster rap. Also with Snoop, you got to look at his longevity, right? Snoop dropped Doggy Style, unquestionable classic in hip hop, right? And then he drops a follow-up that it was a dud in The Dogfather. And then he goes to No Limit Records, gets out of his death row, contract, I guess, and goes to No Limit, whose music does not match what we had become accustomed to with Snoop. So most of us did not check for that first album. Then that second album had some joints on it, and I believe one joint or two had Dr. Dre. And then his final album on No Limit felt more like Snoop from the past, but also it's kind of like the preview of the Snoop you know now. And he went on to have a number of commercial hits, a number of dope albums. He's had some duds, but he's released a ton of music. And probably more important than anything, he is one of the most popular celebrities in the world. And this dude was a gangster rapper back when gangster rapping was not cool to the public eye. I'm just saying, Snoop had a hell of an impact and continues to have one, because he doesn't ignore any endorsements at all. Like, he had everything, cereal, everything. Lil Wayne. Now, there's a certain generation, probably my generation, a little bit older, that didn't really understand the impact of Lil Wayne. Couldn't really see it, right? And obviously, you really wouldn't. You just hear it on the radio, you hear a verse there, you hear kids talking about it, and that's kind of it. But you don't realize how many times Lil Wayne has done major things in hip-hop to kind of push the culture forward. Just by his contributions, right? His time with, the Cash Money, right? Bling Bling days, the Block is Hot days. He stood out from the group. And then the switch in style, rhyming style, beat style, with the Carter series, which was highly successful for him. The mixtape run, at a time where mixtapes became less about exclusives here and there and a bunch of different songs, and more about original content from artists for free on mixtapes, from the drought to everything. Then you can't leave out him bringing in Drake and Nicki Minaj and their impact on the industry, whether you like them or not. A number of artists started to look like him, right? New artists that came out. Before that, there weren't many artists that had locks, right? There just weren't. There weren't many artists that had locks and dressed in a way that was almost like a rock star look. Now you got plenty of them, from Migos to even Future, right? There's plenty of them that kind of give you that Lil Wayne vibe. Lil Wayne did that. At one point in hip hop, he was the guy. And more importantly, he's consistently collaborated with damn near everyone. And in a lot of cases, from what I hear, for free, right? Just because someone like a Nori wanted Lil Wayne on his album, but maybe Lil Wayne is pricey, Lil Wayne did it anyway, and quickly. And these are the stories we've heard. So I feel like Lil Wayne helped move the culture forward by his lyricism, putting lyricism first, whether you like all the bars or not. There's plenty of times where he said some stuff, right? Dope beats, radio hits, a style all his own when it comes to his image and how he promoted himself. You can't deny Lil Wayne's impact, even on cats like Drake, and maybe to a lesser extent J. Cole, definitely Kendrick. You just can't deny what he's done for the game, which really doesn't get talked about enough, if you ask me. Next, Lil' Kim. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, oh wow, what? Lil' Kim? Why? I tell you why. Whether you like it or not, all you have to do is look at the popularity of Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, right? You can even go back a little bit. The signings of people like Trina and Eve, right? And I think Foxy gets a little bit of this credit as well, but I think Lil' Kim stands out for a number of reasons. Before Lil' Kim, and there's no disrespect to the MC Lights and the Queen Latifahs of the world, because we needed that, and the Salt-N-Peppers, right? Salt-N-Pepper brought a certain sexuality to hip hop, right? But honestly, hip hop is a misogynistic sport, if that makes any sense, or if that's a word or phrase, whatever. But it is, right? And it damn sure was. And it was balanced in one way, which was dudes rap however they wanted about females, and it was all good. Typically, when females rap about dudes before Lil' Kim intimately, it didn't really appeal to us dudes, because most of the time it was safe. Let's talk about sex. That's kind of like where it would go, right? It was almost like your mom instead of a woman and what she truly feels. Like, oh, what a man. Okay, cool. That song ain't for me. That's for them. But what Lil' Kim brought was, she brought power to a woman expressing her sexuality in the most explicit way that matched the same way the guys did it. Kool G Rap was notorious for those kinds of records, right? Same thing with Scarface did some of that stuff, like a couple of Too Short, all of that. Lil' Kim was like the female version of Too Short, and guys who rapped about their sexuality in the most explicit way. The one thing about Kim that made her a step above was dudes liked it too. We would recite the lyrics and she would say the craziest things. And back then, you didn't have to say pause, because you didn't pick that saying a phrase would all of a sudden make you gay. That's just an insecurity that exists today, and it's terrible. But Lil' Kim was hard edge, hardcore, right? With the lyrics. Yes, sure, a lot of these women have had ghostwriters, but most of them can write their own raps, including Lil' Kim. And I don't know what she wrote versus what she didn't. I know a couple of things that she didn't write, but that's besides the point. It was about the presentation. It was about the package. She was doing something that made some people feel uncomfortable, made some women apply a double standard. Now, you would think with men that would be the case, but most of the men I knew bought that hardcore album. But there was a double standard sometimes with some women who didn't like it because they felt like they were being too vulgar. But men had been doing it forever in hip hop, so it was okay. And I think Lil' Kim made that okay. Without Lil' Kim, not only don't you have these chicks dressing like her, the whole Barbie thing, she did that already. It's her. Even the Beehive existed before the Bayhive. Look it up. It's just facts. Little Kim's influence on hip hop music and culture and pop culture cannot be denied. What she said in her bars years ahead made it easy for you to walk down the street and hear a record like Pound Town, right? Without Little Kim, that ain't happening. It's just not. So give her her props. Her impact is crazy, and whether you like it or not, that's cool. But at the end of the day, if she didn't have an impact, you wouldn't see all these different variations of what she's already done, and all the way down to the photo shoot. I'm saying. All right, y'all. 4 more to go. Kendrick Lamar. Now, it's easy to look at Kendrick or Drake or J. Cole because they're like the trinity of artists who honestly touched numerous generations. But I think Kendrick Lamar is a step above Drake and J. Cole in the sense that he hasn't released a whack subpar album yet. Now, you may not personally like him because not everybody's gonna like him. That's cool. But he bridges the gap in a way that the other two just do not. They just don't, right? And let me just rattle off a couple of things. He is the best example of bridging the gap, balancing gangster, conscious, radio-friendly, and lyrical skill with fans that span multiple generations. When Good Kid, Mad City came out, it didn't feel like a young dude making a gangster rap album from the 90s. Yet, you got the feel of a gangster rap album from the 90s. But you still got the feel of a new hip-hop artist today in his delivery, in how he presented it, him having Snoop and MC8 appear on the album. When you look at an album like To Pimp a Butterfly, where it's not just boom bap beats or funk beats to represent the West Coast. It's jazz and blues and gospel and folk, like elements, spoken word, like all these elements of music mixed together. His flow is unconventional. One moment he gives you a sporadic flow in the vein of an Eminem. The next moment he gives you a 3 stacks kind of verse. The next moment he's K-Dot, like you'll remember him from Good Kid, Mad City. He's unlimited at what he can do. And more importantly, concepts. To have a concept album more than once, which is like a scavenger hunt when you're listening, to understand what is the overall theme of this album. His last album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, the overall theme was therapy. And he didn't come up with the theme just to say, yo, I got a concept, it's ill, and it got a theme. It's like, no, I was actually going through this, so I decided to create songs around my experience. I'm just saying, hip-hop used to be like this on a regular basis. But for him to still have success and not need to drop as often as his counterparts says a lot about what people feel about his music. And again, from multiple generations. Because there are a couple of people I know who don't mess with anybody new, but mess with Kendrick Lamar, right? I'm talking about old heads for the most part. Eminem. Now, I know what you're going to say. I know what some of y'all going to say. We ain't playing that in the barbershop. Honestly, there's a lot that wasn't being played in the barbershop that should have been played in the barbershop, and everybody wasn't white. But Eminem's on this list because prior to Eminem, of course there was white dudes that rap that we like, right? Of course. But not rhyming like this. Not on this level of technique and wordplay, right? Eminem is also on this list because he is probably the most polarizing hip-hop artist of all time. He is the example of, if he were not white, would he be as successful as a rapidy rap rapper, right? The example I'll give you is, if Pharoah Monch was white like Eminem, would he be more popular? Would he be just as popular? Of course he would, because it is a reflection of this country, right? There are hip hop fans out there, but there's some hip hop fans who are only Eminem fans. Not really hip hop. But what has Eminem done with that, right? He's already rich as a result. A lot of his fans, like for example, I did a podcast on a study of different artists and where the majority of their fans lie across the country. And it was like a heat map. And like with Migos, obviously Atlanta was lit up like crazy, and you can see some in New York, and a couple dots in LA or whatever. But Eminem was strongest in the Midwest. Okay, makes sense. But the audience, the white audience, he tends to target, like in songs like White America, most of them live out there, and most of them tend to be his fan base. But that's his biggest fan base, is that. And without a doubt, hip hop has been around. It has everything to do with the color of his skin. But he has consistently shown that he is about the culture of hip hop. It doesn't matter if it's just battling, like this Melly Mel stuff, or wearing t-shirts of albums that almost never get talked about, right? You might see some random dude on Twitter like, yo, this Paris album was my joint. You see people chime in, but it's never like trending or nothing crazy, because most people never heard of Paris, never heard that album, and could care less in 2023. But Eminem doing that, wearing a Naughty by Nature shirt. Dudes don't even talk about Naughty by Nature. Giving props to different cats. And I could go on and on. But most importantly, his impact, and I'm not saying all white folk, but his impact opened up a different door. Probably based off of race and exposure for hip hop fans. Because there's some people who became fans of other artists through Eminem. It's unfortunate that it has to happen that way, but it's real. And the fact that he held the line for true hip hop and lyricism and technique being important in culture, and flowers for artists like Redman and Tretch and Pharoah Monch and Nas and AZ and all these different people that he was a big fan of. Even if there are fans who will say, well, I'm just an Eminem fan, I'm pretty sure there are a number of people who now became fans of others. Just ask 50 Cent. I'm talking about by affiliation. Just ask 50 Cent. Just ask Slaughterhouse. Just ask Griselda. Their popularity grew as a result of being affiliated with Eminem, and he did not have to have these spitters and these hardcore hip-hop dudes as a part of his roster. He could have easily went another way. So he's had impact on the culture in so many ways that it's undeniable, and you can't really ignore it. It's not the impact. Remember my rules for this list. Doesn't make him bigger than Run DMC. It just means that he is one of people on my list of 10 impact artists. All right, 2 more and then we out. Outkast. Man, listen. I didn't know Outkast would become the Outkast they became. Outkast, at the time they dropped Southern Playalistic, wasn't like, oh, this is so new and mind-blowing. It was dope. It was music from somewhere else, from me being from Brooklyn, New York, right? But I figured Southern Playalistic was what they were. They were always going to drop that kind of music. Then they drop AT Aliens, and you're like, well, wait a minute. Skill level done went up, and musically, this is different. Then Stankonia, Quimini, Speaker Box, Love Below, like even the Idlewild soundtrack. And when you look at Outkast, for one, their music reflects their name. They don't do what everybody else does. They do them. Also, none of their albums are the same. None of their albums are the same. You don't feel like, well, I heard this one, so this one sounds exactly the same, so I'll just stick to this one. No, it's all a different vibe, but it's still uniquely Outkast. You want to talk about influence? I mean, you could look at a number of the different hip hop, branches, I would say, as far as artists go, from singing to the types of beats they choose. Outkast was kind of doing that before everybody, like that kind of variety. And for me back then, before I became a bigger fan, it was a little frustrated because typically I had an expectation for each artist I liked, and Outkast would come out and just say, man, we got a banjo in this joint. That's the beat. A banjo's playing and a harmonica. And I'm like, I don't want to hear this Negro spiritual on the porch. What is this? Where's elevators? Like, you know what I'm saying? But then I came to realize, like, man, but that's what's dope about Outkast. It's always going to be different. It's always going to be different. But it's still going to be hip hop. Commercial success, I'm just going over some of the joints. Versatility in the game, skills, style, musical variety, like we talked about, and in a lot of ways, the blueprint for records like To Pimp a Butterfly. And honestly, the way Kendrick approaches rhyming now reminds me more like of 3 Stacks, right? Who helped him work on To Pimp a Butterfly. So again, the impact cannot be denied for a hip hop group such as Outkast and their long lasting influence on artists, from how they present their art to how they dress to how they carry themselves. And it's unfortunate that it stopped when it did as a group. But I mean, we got a decent amount of albums from them, and just none of them are whack. So there you have it. And lastly, Tupac Shakur. I could go on and on about Tupac. I think I think it's easy to see why Tupac is so revered in hip hop, and it's not one of those things. It's like, oh, because he died tragically, he died young. It's like, a fascination with that when it comes to pop culture. Yeah, that's true. I think some of his legend has been overblown by overzealous fans. Some fans who I feel like probably became fans or became bigger fans once he died, which is kind of terrible. But as a person that was a Tupac fan, cautiously in the beginning, because I didn't like everything, but then much bigger once Me Against the World came out and All Eyes on Me, there was a certain level of appreciation for Tupac, but his impact and why people still love him to this day has a lot more to do with his messaging. Now, I'm not talking about thug life. People like that too. I like it too. I'm not talking about thug life, Pac, and Ride on My Enemies and Hennessy, and whatever, right? Or that Nas introduced it to. Man, I don't believe that. But you know what I mean? Like, his impact is so much greater in the conscious music that he released, because it sound intimate. It sound personal, right? It was relatable, whether you were going through what he was expressing or you knew someone who was. Tupac always sounds like he's talking to you when he made those conscious records. Just to go over my notes real quick, his mark on hip hop is unquestionable, and it's less about the whole death row thug life thing, but more about making impact records that speak directly to the heartbeat of the Black community. Just for example, just quick examples. Songs like Dear Mama, songs like Brenda's Got a Baby, and songs like I Ain't Mad at You. Tales that anybody can relate to, but are specifically grounded in the lives of the Black community, in particular in the ghetto, right? And a song like Keep Your Head Up is inspiring. You recognize what's happening. Rappers didn't make songs like that. Rappers didn't make songs like Brenda's Got a Baby, but Tupac did. And I think in the same ways that LL opened the door for rappers to feel like it's cool to make a rap love song, especially because it hits the radio and we can get success, I think Tupac made rappers think about their lyrics. Now, was he the first to ever have a message? No. The Message, kind of did that. But his influences, being affiliated with the Black Panther Party, being raised around them, and just being really good at speaking to what's real is what people hold on to about his legacy and his music. It's when you sit back and say, Tupac is one of the greatest rappers of all time, especially for that reason. That's my list. Top 10, or we said we're not doing top 10 hip hop artists who have had an impact on this music and this culture throughout its 50 years. I just want to give a shout out to all the hip hop heads, all the artists, DJs, breakers, graphers from across the world, those who create hip hop films, videos, and keep the music going, whether it's old or new, underground, commercial radio, whatever you want to call it. It's all a part of what we do and what we love, especially myself as a content creator. I do not get a dime. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's really just based off of a passion I've had for this music since I was a little guy, and I love to talk about it. So if you have a top 10 list or 10 impact artists that I didn't name that you would like to discuss, put it in the comment section on the video side. Rate this podcast on Apple Podcasts, but most importantly, share it with people enjoy this kind of content. If you feel so ever inclined, we do have merch that you can see on the video side. Hip Hop Now podcast t-shirts, great way to support the podcast. All of the money and proceeds I receive from listeners and viewers of this podcast goes right back into the production of this podcast. There's a couple of things I've purchased with your support, including microphones and cameras and ways to improve Wi-Fi, all kinds of things. So you get to become a producer of this podcast in that way. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Happy birthday, hip hop. Peace.